Eagle enters the police station and hands a paper to the officer. He turned pale because of the reason. The morning sun beat down relentlessly on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona, as Police Chief James Hawkins strode purposefully into the precinct. His weathered face bore the marks of countless sleepless nights, each line a testament to the weight of responsibility he carried. Today, however, there was an added tension in his step. An armed robbery had rattled the community, and he needed answers. As James pushed open the door to the conference room, he was greeted by a sea of expectant faces. Detectives, officers, and analysts sat around the large oval table, their expressions a mix of determination and concern. Among them was Michael Reeves, a young officer whose piercing blue eyes seemed to hold a wisdom beyond his years. "All right, people," James began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Let's get down to business. We've got a city on edge, and it's our job to bring them peace of mind." As James launched into the details of the robbery, Michael found his attention drawn to the open window. The warm breeze carried the scent of desert flowers, a stark contrast to the gravity of their discussion. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye. With a powerful whoosh of wings, a majestic bald eagle soared through the open window, its presence immediately commanding attention. The room fell silent as the bird circled once before landing on the back of an empty chair. In its beak, it held a small piece of blood-stained fabric. While most of the officers recoiled in surprise, Michael felt an inexplicable pull towards the creature. Its eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to bore into him with an intensity that left him breathless. As his colleagues erupted into a chorus of exclamations and questions, Michael remained transfixed, unable to shake the feeling that this was more than mere coincidence. Chief Hawkins, his face a mask of bewilderment, attempted to regain control of the room. "All right, everyone, calm down. Johnson, call animal control. We need to—" "Wait!" Michael's voice rang out, surprising even himself with its urgency. All eyes turned to him, including those of the eagle. "Chief, I think this means something. The eagle, the fabric, it's trying to tell us something." A ripple of skepticism passed through the room, but James held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. He'd known Michael long enough to trust the young officer's instincts. "Go on, Reeves. What are you thinking?" Michael took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Sir, eagles aren't native to downtown Phoenix, and they certainly don't carry blood-stained fabric for no reason. I think we need to follow it." The room erupted once more, but James's voice cut through the chaos. "Reeves, you've got 5 minutes to make your case. After that, we're calling animal control, clocks ticking." As Michael began to explain his hunch, the eagle's gaze never wavered. Outside, the Phoenix sun continued to blaze, unaware that it was witnessing the beginning of a mystery that would shake the city to its core. Chapter 2. A Trail of Feathers. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Despite the skepticism of his colleagues, Michael's impassioned plea had struck a chord with Chief Hawkins. As the young officer raced down the precinct steps, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, he could scarcely believe what was happening. "Reeves!" The chief's gruff voice called out from behind him. "You're not going alone. Take Rodriguez with you." Michael nodded gratefully as Sarah Rodriguez, a seasoned detective with a no-nonsense attitude, fell into step beside him. Her dark eyes held a mixture of curiosity and doubt, but she'd been in the force long enough to know that sometimes the strangest leads yielded the most significant breakthroughs. As they reached the street, Michael's eyes scanned the cloudless sky. For a heart-stopping moment, he feared the eagle had disappeared. But then, a distant cry reached his ears, and he spotted the majestic bird circling high above, as if waiting for them. "There!" He pointed, already breaking into a run. Sarah matched his pace, her hand instinctively resting on her holstered weapon. They weaved through the busy streets of Phoenix, the eagle always just within sight. Pedestrians stopped and stared as the two officers raced past, following the bird's lead with unwavering determination. The city's landscape began to change around them, the towering buildings giving way to more residential areas, then to the outskirts where the desert began to reclaim the land. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, the eagle's flight path began to dip lower. Michael and Sarah found themselves at the edge of a small, run-down neighborhood. The houses here were old and weathered, many showing signs of abandonment. The eagle let out another cry, this one somehow more urgent, and swooped down towards a dilapidated cabin set apart from the other houses. As they approached, Michael felt a chill run down his spine despite the oppressive heat. Something about this place felt wrong. Sarah drew her weapon, her expression grim. "Reeves, I hope you know what you're doing. This better not be a wild goose chase, or should I say wild eagle chase." Michael managed a weak smile at her attempt at humor, but his focus was entirely on the cabin. As they drew closer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, caught on a rusted nail by the cabin's warped front door, was a small piece of fabric. It was stained dark red. "Rodriguez," he whispered, pointing. "Look." Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the fabric. In an instant, her demeanor changed from skeptical to alert. She raised her radio to her lips, speaking in a low, urgent tone. "Dispatch, this is Detective Rodriguez. We need backup at..." She quickly rattled off their location. As they waited for backup to arrive, Michael's mind raced. What had the eagle led them to? Was this connected to the armed robbery they'd been discussing earlier? Or was it something else entirely? And most puzzling of all, how had the eagle known to bring them here? The sound of approaching sirens broke through his thoughts. As the wail grew louder, Michael caught movement from the corner of his eye. The eagle had landed on a nearby fence post, its piercing gaze fixed on the cabin. For a moment, Michael could have sworn he saw something almost human in those eyes, a mix of sorrow, determination, and hope. As the first patrol car screeched to a halt behind them, Michael steeled himself. Whatever they were about to uncover, he had a feeling it would change everything. The mystery of the eagle and the blood-stained fabric was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. As backup arrived, the quiet neighborhood erupted into a flurry of activity. Officers swarmed the area, setting up a perimeter around the dilapidated cabin. Chief Hawkins himself had arrived, his face a mask of determination as he strode towards Michael and Sarah. "Reeves, Rodriguez," he barked. "What's the situation?" Sarah quickly filled him in on their eagle-guided journey and the discovery of the blood-stained fabric. As she spoke, Michael's attention was drawn once again to the majestic bird perched nearby. It hadn't moved, its unwavering gaze fixed on the cabin as if standing guard. Chief Hawkins ran a hand through his graying hair, his expression a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "I've been on the force for 30 years, and I've never heard anything like this, but we're here now, and that fabric is enough for probable cause. Let's do this by the book, people." As the SWAT team moved into position, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah looking at him, her eyes soft with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Whatever we find in there, Reeves, you did good. Trust your instincts." Michael nodded, grateful for her support. As they approached the cabin, weapons drawn, the world seemed to narrow to this single moment. The creak of the weathered porch beneath their feet, the whisper of the desert wind, the distant cry of the eagle, everything else faded away. With a nod from the chief, the SWAT team breached the door. "Phoenix PD, show yourself." The inside of the cabin was dark and musty, years of neglect evident in every corner. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, Michael felt his heart race. There, in the far corner, was a sight that would haunt him for years to come. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, sat huddled on a dirty mattress. Her wrists were bound with frayed rope, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and hope. For a moment, the cabin was eerily silent, save for the girl's soft whimpers. Then, chaos erupted. A figure burst from a hidden alcove, brandishing a knife. "Stay back!" the man shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll hurt her, I swear." Time seemed to slow. Michael saw the flash of the blade, heard Sarah's shout of warning, felt the surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Without thinking, he lunged forward, tackling the assailant to the ground. The knife clattered across the floor as they grappled. the man's strength fueled by desperation. For a heart-stopping moment, Michael feared he'd made a fatal mistake. But then, Sarah was there, her steady hands securing the suspect as other officers rushed to free the girl. As the cabin filled with the sounds of radio chatter and the soothing voices of officers comforting the rescued child, Michael found himself drawn to the window. There, framed against the setting sun, was the eagle. It met his gaze one last time, and Michael could have sworn he saw a glimmer of approval in its eyes before it spread its magnificent wings and soared away. Later, as the scene was processed and statements were taken, Chief Hawkins approached Michael. "I don't know how you knew, Reeves, but you saved that girl's life today. Good work." Michael nodded, still processing the events of the day. "Thank you, sir, but I can't take all the credit. It was the eagle." Hawkins raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. As he walked away, Michael heard him mutter, "Eagles and blood-stained fabric. I'm getting too old for this." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The mystery of the eagle and its connection to this case tugged at the edges of his mind. Little did he know, the threads of an even greater mystery were about to unravel, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, redemption, and the thin line between right and wrong. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Wind. The days following the dramatic rescue passed in a whirlwind of activity. The entire Phoenix Police Department was abuzz with the story of the eagle that had led them to the kidnapped girl. Local news stations ran the story on repeat, dubbing it the miracle of the Phoenix Eagle. Michael found himself thrust into the spotlight, a role he neither sought nor particularly enjoyed. As he sat at his desk, sifting through the mountain of paperwork the case had generated, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. The kidnapper, a man named Frank Holloway, had been surprisingly tight-lipped since his arrest. His background check had turned up little of note, a few minor offenses, nothing that would suggest he was capable of such a heinous act. "Reeves," Sarah's voice broke through his reverie. "Chief wants to see us. Says it's important." Michael nodded, grateful for the distraction from his circling thoughts. As they made their way to Hawkins' office, he noticed Sarah seemed uncharacteristically tense. "Everything okay, Rodriguez?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, Michael. Something about this case, it doesn't add up. And I've been doing some digging. There's more to this story than we're seeing." Before Michael could press her for details, they arrived at the chief's office. Hawkins was seated behind his desk, his face grave. "Close the door," he instructed as they entered. Once they were seated, Hawkins leaned forward, his voice low. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, understood?" At their nods, he continued. "The girl, Lily Thompson. She's not just any kidnapping victim. She's the daughter of Senator Thompson." Michael felt the air leave his lungs. He wanted the senator to publicly support a bill that would overturn several high-profile convictions from a decade ago. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Chief, those convictions, they wouldn't happen to be connected to the Westbrook case, would they?" Michael looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Westbrook case? I'm not familiar with it." Hawkins and Sarah exchanged a look, and the chief sighed heavily. 10 years ago, there was a series of high-profile arrests that made a lot of careers in this department. A group of men were convicted of running a sophisticated drug trafficking operation. The star witness was a man named Daniel Westbrook. His testimony put away some big names, including his own brother. As Hawkins spoke, pieces began to fall into place in Michael's mind. "And let me guess, one of the men convicted was Frank Holloway." Sarah nodded. "His brother, actually." Frank always maintained his brother's innocence, claimed the whole trial was a setup, but no one would listen. Michael's mind was racing. So, Frank kidnaps the senator's daughter to force a review of the case. It's extreme, but why now, after all these years? Hawkins leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. That's what we need to find out. And there's one more thing. The eagle that led you to the cabin. It belongs to Daniel Westbrook. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. The eagle, the mysterious guide that had led them to Lily, was connected to the very man whose testimony had set this whole chain of events in motion. But how? And why? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah spoke up. Michael, I think it's time we paid Mr. Westbrook a visit. Something tells me he knows a lot more than he's letting on. Hawkins nodded his approval. Go, but tread carefully. This case has the potential to shake the very foundations of our justice system. And remember, not a word of this to anyone outside this room. As Michael and Sarah left the office, the weight of their new knowledge settled heavily upon them. The rescue of Lily Thompson, it seemed, was just the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. And somewhere out there, an eagle soared, carrying secrets that could change everything. Chapter 5. The Keeper of Secrets. The drive to Daniel Westbrook's residence was tense, filled with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Michael's mind raced with questions, each one leading to another in an endless loop. How was Westbrook connected to the eagle? What did he know about Lily's kidnapping? And most importantly, what secrets was he keeping that could potentially unravel a decade-old case? As they pulled up to a modest house on the outskirts of Phoenix, Sarah turned to Michael, her expression serious. Remember, Reeves, we're just here to ask questions. Westbrook's not a suspect, yet let's see what he has to say before we jump to any conclusions. Michael nodded, taking a deep breath to center himself. As they approached the front door, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something much bigger than they'd initially thought. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes. Daniel Westbrook regarded them with a mixture of wariness and resignation, as if he'd been expecting this visit for a long time. "Detectives," he said, his voice gravelly and low, "I suppose it was only a matter of time. Please, come in." The interior of Westbrook's home was sparse but neat, the walls adorned with various nature photographs, many featuring eagles in flight. As they settled into the living room, Michael's eyes were drawn to a large and ornate perch near the window. It was empty, but there was no doubt in his mind that this was where the mysterious eagle made its home. "I assume you're here about Skyhawk," Westbrook said, breaking the silence. Sarah leaned forward, her eyebrows raised. "Skyhawk." "My eagle," Westbrook clarified, a hint of pride in his voice. "Though I suspect you're more interested in his recent activities." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. It was clear that Westbrook knew more than they'd anticipated. "Mr. Westbrook," Michael began, "we have some questions about the events that transpired a few days ago. Your eagle led us to a kidnapped girl. We need to understand how and why." Westbrook sighed heavily, his eyes distant. "Skyhawk has always been special, more than just a bird of prey. He's intuitive, almost psychic at times. I've had him for over a decade now, ever since—" He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. "Ever since the trial," Sarah prompted gently. Westbrook's gaze sharpened. "You've done your homework, detective. Yes, ever since I testified in that godforsaken trial. Skyhawk was my lifeline during those dark days. He kept me sane when the guilt threatened to overwhelm me." Michael leaned forward, intrigued. "Guilt? But your testimony put away dangerous criminals, of innocent men caught in the crossfire of a war on drugs that cared more about conviction rates than justice." "I didn't lie on the stand," Westbrook said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But I didn't tell the whole truth either. I was scared, facing pressure from all sides. The prosecutors promised me immunity and protection if I testified, so I did. I told myself it was for the greater good, that the end justified the means. But I've lived with the consequences ever since." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Mr. Westbrook, why are you telling us this now? What changed?" Westbrook's eyes flickered to the empty perch by the window. "Skyhawk. He's always been more than just a pet. It's like he can sense injustice, feel the weight of the lies I've carried. When he brought that fabric to your precinct, I knew it was time. Time for the truth to come out, no matter the cost. Michael's mind was reeling. Are you saying that Frank Holloway, the man we arrested for kidnapping Lily Thompson, is innocent? No, Westbrook shook his head. What he did was wrong. There's no excusing that. But his desperation, that comes from a place of injustice. His brother, along with others, were wrongfully convicted based on my incomplete testimony and fabricated evidence. Frank's been fighting for years to get someone to listen, to reopen the case. When all legal avenues failed, he resorted to kidnapping, Sarah finished, her expression grim. Westbrook nodded. I've been following the case, knew about the ransom demands. When I realized what was happening, I knew I had to do something. But years of keeping silent had made me a coward, so I turned to the one being I trusted completely. Skyhawk, Michael breathed, the pieces finally falling into place. Yes, Westbrook confirmed. I showed him Lily's picture, let him pick up the scent from a piece of her clothing that the police had released to the media for identification. The rest, well, you know what happened next. As the full implications of Westbrook's confession sank in, a heavy silence fell over the room. The case had just become infinitely more complex, with ramifications that could shake the Phoenix justice system to its core. Suddenly, a piercing cry broke through the tension. All eyes turned to the window, where Skyhawk had appeared, his majestic form silhouetted against the setting sun. As the eagle's penetrating gaze swept over them, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The truth was out, but the real battle for justice was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Winds of Change. The following days were a whirlwind of activity, as the implications of Westbrook's confession reverberated through the Phoenix Police Department. Chief Hawkins had called for a full review of the decade-old drug trafficking case, much to the consternation of some of the department's old guard. Michael found himself at the center of a storm, his role in following Skyhawk's lead now seen in a new light. Some hailed him as a hero, a young officer whose instincts had not only saved a little girl but potentially uncovered a grave miscarriage of justice. Others viewed him with suspicion, wondering if he had somehow been complicit in Westbrook's revelation. As he pored over old case files in a cramped conference room, Michael's head was spinning. The more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. It was clear that corners had been cut, evidence stretched to fit the prosecution's narrative. But proving it after all these years would be an uphill battle. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, placing one in front of him. "Thanks," Michael replied gratefully, taking a long sip. "Any news?" Sarah sighed, settling into a chair across from him. "The DA's office is in chaos. They're trying to decide whether to fight the reopening of the case or get ahead of it. Senator Thompson is putting pressure on them to keep things quiet, worried about how it'll affect his re-election campaign." Michael shook his head in disgust. A little girl was kidnapped. Innocent men might be in prison, and all they care about is politics. "Welcome to the real world, rookie," Sarah said, but there was no bite to her words. She looked as tired and disillusioned as he felt. Just then, Chief Hawkins burst into the room. His face flushed with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "We've got a development," he announced. "Frank Holloway's willing to talk, but only to you two." Michael and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. "Us? Why?" Michael asked. Hawkins shrugged. "Says he trusts you. Something about the eagle leading you to the truth. At this point, I don't care about his reasons. I want to remind you that anything you say can be used in court. Are you sure you don't want a lawyer present?" Frank shook his head. "No more lawyers, no more games. I'm ready to tell the whole truth, for what it's worth." Over the next hour, Frank wove a tale that filled in the gaps of Westbrook's confession. He spoke of a corrupt detective who had orchestrated much of the false evidence, of threats made against Westbrook to ensure his cooperation, of a drug trade that reached into the highest echelons of Phoenix society. As he listened, Michael felt a chill run down his spine. If even half of what Frank was saying was true, this case had the potential to bring down not just a few wrongful convictions, but an entire network of corruption that had festered in Phoenix for years. When Frank finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Holloway, you understand that while this information may help in reopening your brother's case, it doesn't exonerate you from the kidnapping charges." Frank nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I know, and I'll accept whatever punishment comes my way. I just couldn't live with the lies anymore. That little girl, Lily, when I saw her fear, her innocence, I realized I'd become the very thing I was fighting against. I'm just grateful that Eagle led you to her before I could do any real harm." As they left the interrogation room, Michael felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about justice, about right and wrong, had been turned on its head. "What now?" he asked Sarah as they walked back to their desks. She gave him a weary but determined look. "Now, we dig deeper. We follow every lead, no matter where it takes us. We owe it to Frank, to his brother, to every person who suffered because of this corruption. And we owe it to Lily to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." As they settled in for what promised to be a long night of investigation, Michael glanced out the window. There, perched on a nearby streetlight, was Skyhawk. The eagle's piercing gaze seemed to bore into him, a silent reminder of the responsibility they now carried. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And with Skyhawk as their unlikely guardian, Michael knew they wouldn't rest until justice was truly served. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. As the investigation into the decade-old drug trafficking case deepened, Michael and Sarah found themselves delving into a labyrinth of old files, faded photographs, and long-forgotten testimonies. The conference room they had commandeered for their investigation looked like something out of a crime thriller, with walls covered in timelines, suspect photos, and red string connecting various pieces of evidence. It was during one late night, as they pored over a particularly dense file, that Sarah made a startling discovery. "Michael, look at this," she said, her voice tight with excitement and apprehension. She pushed a grainy photograph across the table to him. Michael leaned in, squinting at the image. It showed a group of men in suits, clearly at some sort of formal event. His eyes widened as he recognized a younger Daniel Westbrook among them, but it was the man standing next to Westbrook that made his breath catch. "Is that—" he began, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. Sarah nodded grimly. "Senator Thompson, 10 years younger, but it's definitely him." The implications were staggering. Senator Thompson, the man whose daughter had been kidnapped, the politician pushing hardest to keep the old case closed, had known Daniel Westbrook long before the trial that had put Frank Holloway's brother behind bars. "This changes everything," Michael said, his mind racing. "We need to talk to Westbrook again, and somehow we need to get Senator Thompson in here for questioning." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, looking worried. "Easier said than done. Thompson has friends in high places. If we move on this without ironclad evidence, we could be shut down before we even start." Just then, a tapping at the window made them both jump. There, silhouetted against the night sky, was Skyhawk. The eagle's presence had become almost commonplace over the past weeks, but something about its appearance now felt significant. As they watched, Skyhawk dropped something on the windowsill before taking flight again. Michael rushed to the window, his heart pounding. There, gleaming in the moonlight, was a small flash drive. With trembling hands, Michael plugged the drive into his computer. What they found inside left them both speechless. Video files, audio recordings, financial documents, a treasure trove of evidence that painted a damning picture of corruption reaching back over a decade. "How?" Sarah breathed, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the files. Michael shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "I've learned not to question Skyhawk's methods. The real question is, what do we do with this?" The answer came in the form of Chief Hawkins, who burst into the room looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Turn on the news," he said without preamble. As they flipped on the small TV in the corner of the room, they were greeted by the sight of Daniel Westbrook standing at a podium, flanked by reporters. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Breaking, star witness in decade-old drug case comes clean, alleges widespread corruption. I can no longer live with the weight of my silence, Westbrook was saying, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. 10 years ago, I was coerced into giving false testimony that sent innocent men to prison. Today, I'm here to set the record straight, no matter the consequences. As Westbrook began to detail the extent of the corruption, naming names and providing dates, Michael and Sarah exchanged a look of disbelief. Somehow, Westbrook had decided to go public with everything, potentially risking his own freedom in the process. "This is it," Sarah said, a note of wonder in her voice. "This is the break we've been waiting for." Chief Hawkins nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and trepidation. "I ought to have done good work, but this is where things get really dangerous. We're not just dealing with a few corrupt cops anymore. This goes all the way to the top." As if to underscore his words, Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Senator Thompson. As he answered the call, Michael could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever came next would change the course of their investigation, and possibly the entire city of Phoenix forever. Little did he know, the most shocking revelations were yet to come, and Skyhawk's role in this unfolding drama was far from over. Chapter 8. The storm breaks. The call from Senator Thompson was brief and terse. He demanded a meeting, away from the prying eyes of the media that were now swarming the police department. Despite the risks, Michael and Sarah agreed, knowing this might be their only chance to get answers directly from the man at the center of the growing scandal. As they pulled up to the agreed meeting spot, a secluded park on the outskirts of Phoenix, the first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky. The senator's sleek black car was already there, its tinted windows betraying nothing of the occupant inside. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over her holstered weapon. Michael nodded, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "As ready as I'll ever be." As they approached the car, the back door swung open. Senator Thompson emerged, looking far older and more haggard than his polished public appearances would suggest. The man who stepped out after him, however, made both detectives stop in their tracks. "Frank," Michael said in disbelief, recognizing the recently released Frank Holloway. The senator held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Before you jump to any conclusions, hear us out. There's more to this story than anyone knows, and it's time the truth came to light." Over the next hour, as the sun rose fully over the desert landscape, Senator Thompson and Frank Holloway wove a tale that was almost too incredible to believe. They spoke of a decades-long undercover operation of deep-cover agents placed within criminal organizations, of sacrifices made in the name of a greater good that had somehow lost its way. "Frank was never a real criminal," Thompson explained, his voice heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. "He was one of ours, a deep-cover agent tasked with infiltrating the drug trade. The kidnapping. It was a desperate move to force our hand, to bring this whole operation into the light before more innocent people got hurt." Frank nodded, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I couldn't stand by and watch more lives be ruined. My brother, the others who were wrongfully convicted, they were collateral damage in an operation that had spiraled out of control. I had to do something drastic to shake things up." As Michael and Sarah struggled to process this new information, a familiar cry split the air. Skyhawk descended from the sky, landing gracefully on a nearby bench. In his beak was another flash drive. Senator Thompson let out a rueful laugh. "Ah, Daniel's bird. I should have known he'd have a backup plan. That drive probably contains everything, the full scope of the operation, every player involved, every mistake we made along the way." "Why tell us all this now?" Sarah asked, her voice hard. "Why not come clean years ago?" The senator's shoulders sagged. Fear, ambition, a misguided belief that the ends justified the means. Take your pick. But seeing my daughter in danger, realizing how far we'd strayed from our original mission, it was a wake-up call. One I should have heeded long ago. As the implications of their revelations sank in, Michael felt a mix of emotions washing over him. Shock, anger, and a grudging respect for the complexity of the situation they had uncovered. "So, what happens now?" he asked, looking between the senator and Frank. Senator Thompson straightened his shoulders, a look of determination replacing the weariness on his face. "Now, we face the music. I'm prepared to hold a press conference to lay out everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's time for transparency, no matter the cost to my career or reputation." Frank nodded in agreement. "And I'm ready to turn myself in, to face whatever consequences come my way for the kidnapping. But I hope that with the full story out there, the court will understand the desperation that drove me to such extremes." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. "That's all well and good, but we need to tread carefully. This kind of revelation could shake the foundations of not just Phoenix but law enforcement agencies across the country. We need a plan." As if on cue, Skyhawk let out another cry, drawing their attention. The eagle had moved closer, its intelligent eyes seeming to bore into each of them in turn. Michael felt a smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "I think our feathered friend has been trying to show us the way all along. Maybe it's time we fully embraced his guidance." And so, as the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, an unlikely alliance was formed. A young detective driven by idealism, a seasoned cop tempered by years on the force, a senator seeking redemption, a deep cover agent emerging from the shadows, and a majestic eagle that seemed to embody the very spirit of justice. Together, they began to craft a strategy that would bring the truth to light while minimizing the potential fallout. It would be a delicate balance, but with Skyhawk as their symbolic guardian, they felt equal to the task. Chapter 9. Truth Takes Flight. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. As Senator Thompson prepared for his tell-all press conference, Michael and Sarah worked tirelessly to corroborate every piece of evidence, every statement, ensuring that when the truth came out, it would be ironclad. Frank Holloway, true to his word, turned himself in, but was released on his own recognizance given the extraordinary circumstances. He became an invaluable asset, filling in gaps in the narrative and providing insights into the deep cover operation that had gone so terribly awry. Through it all, Skyhawk remained a constant presence, sometimes perched outside the precinct windows, other times soaring high above the city as if keeping watch. His appearances had become something of a media sensation, with local news outlets dubbing him the Guardian Eagle of Phoenix. On the morning of the press conference, Michael stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. The weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily upon him. They weren't just exposing a corrupt operation, they were potentially reshaping the entire landscape of law enforcement in Arizona and beyond. A knock at his door startled him out of his reverie. He opened it to find Sarah, looking as nervous as he felt, but with a determined glint in her eye. "Ready to change the world, partner?" she asked with a wry smile. Michael took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." As they drove to the location of the press conference, the streets of Phoenix seemed eerily quiet, as if the whole city was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. News vans lined the streets near the courthouse steps where Senator Thompson would make his statement, and there, perched atop the courthouse dome, was Skyhawk, his majestic form silhouetted against the morning sky. Senator Thompson approached the podium, flanked by Michael, Sarah, and Frank. The sea of reporters fell silent as the senator began to speak, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his words. "People of Phoenix, people of Arizona, my fellow Americans," he began. "I stand before you today to confess to a grave injustice, one that has festered in the shadows for far too long." As the senator laid bare the details of the decade-long undercover operation, its noble beginnings and tragic derailment, Michael scanned the crowd. He saw shock, disbelief, anger, and in some faces, a glimmer of hope. This was a moment of reckoning, but also an opportunity for healing and reform. Suddenly, a commotion at the back of the crowd caught his attention. A man was pushing his way forward, his face contorted with rage. With a sickening jolt, Michael recognized him as one of the detectives implicated in the corrupt operation. Time seemed to slow as the man reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. Before Michael could react, before he could shout a warning, a brown blur streaked across the sky. Skyhawk, with a fierce cry, dove towards the armed man. The eagle's talons raked across the attacker's face, causing him to stumble and drop his weapon. In an instant, Sarah and several other officers had tackled him to the ground. As the would-be assassin was led away in handcuffs, a stunned silence fell over the crowd. Then, slowly at first but building to a crescendo, applause erupted. It wasn't just for the senator's bravery in coming clean, or for the quick action of the police. It was for Skyhawk, the unlikely guardian who had once again intervened at a crucial moment. Senator Thompson, visibly shaken but undeterred, returned to the microphone. If there was ever any doubt about the hand of justice guiding us, let it be laid to rest. We have been given a second chance to set things right, and we must not squander it. As the press conference concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Michael felt a profound sense of change in the air. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials, both literal and figurative, to face. But for the first time in years, there was a sense of hope, a belief that true justice could prevail. Skyhawk, his mission seemingly accomplished, spread his magnificent wings and soared high above the city. As Michael watched him disappear into the vast Arizona sky, he knew that Phoenix would never be the same. The truth had taken flight, and with it, the promise of a brighter, more just future. Chapter 10. New Horizons. In the weeks and months that followed the explosive press conference, Phoenix underwent a transformation unlike anything in its history. The revelations of the deep cover operation and its aftermath sent shockwaves through every level of law enforcement and government. Michael and Sarah found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. There were inquiries to oversee, reforms to implement, and a justice system to rebuild almost from the ground up. It was exhausting, often frustrating work, but every small victory felt like a step towards redemption for the entire city. Frank Holloway, in a surprising turn of events, was pardoned for his role in Lily's kidnapping. The court recognized the extreme circumstances that had driven him to such desperate measures. He chose to channel his experiences into advocacy work, becoming a powerful voice for criminal justice reform. Senator Thompson, true to his word, resigned from his position, but rather than fading into obscurity, he became a driving force behind a nationwide movement for greater transparency and accountability in law enforcement operations. And through it all, Skyhawk remained a constant presence. The eagle had become something of a mascot for the renewed Phoenix Police Department, a symbol of vigilance and justice that reminded everyone of the remarkable chain of events that had led to this new era. On a warm autumn evening, almost a year to the day since Skyhawk had first appeared with that fateful piece of fabric, Michael found himself standing on the roof of the police precinct. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Sarah approaching, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She handed one to him with a smile. "Penny for your thoughts, partner?" she asked, leaning against the railing beside him. Michael took a sip of coffee, considering her question. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, I was a rookie cop who could barely find his way around the precinct. Now, you're the youngest detective in Phoenix PD history, with a commendation from the governor and a fan club of birdwatchers," Sarah finished with a chuckle. Michael laughed, shaking his head. "When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous." "Oh, it is ridiculous, guys," Sarah agreed. "But it's also pretty amazing." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. In the distance, they could see the silhouette of Skyhawk circling lazily on the thermals. "Do you ever wonder," Michael said softly, "if we'll ever know the whole truth? About Skyhawk, about Westbrook, about all of it?" Sarah considered this for a moment. "And I think some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Maybe the point isn't to understand everything, but to appreciate the journey." As if in agreement, Skyhawk let out a cry that echoed across the city. The eagle swooped low over the precinct, close enough that Michael could feel the rush of air from its wings, before soaring back up into the darkening sky. "Whatever happens next," Michael said, a smile playing on his lips, "I have a feeling our feathered friend will be watching over us." Sarah raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To new horizons, partner, and to the guardians who guide us there, whether they walk on two legs or soar on wings." As they clinked their cups together, Michael felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The future was uncertain, full of challenges yet to be faced. But with allies like Sarah, with symbols of hope like Skyhawk, and with the renewed spirit of justice that now pervaded Phoenix, he knew they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The saga of the Guardian Eagle had transformed not just a city, but the lives of everyone it had touched. And as Skyhawk's cry once again echoed through the night, Michael knew that this was not an end, but a beginning, a new chapter in the ongoing story of justice, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between humans and the natural world that surrounds them. In the sky above Phoenix, Skyhawk soared on, a silent guardian, a living reminder that sometimes the most profound truths come to us on wings of hope and feathers of change.